Finally back to painting some Dungeons & Dragons monsters, and this is my first Patreon pick video. I asked my Patreon supporters what giant they would like to see painted next, and they picked the Fire Giant. Not the one I was looking forward to, unfortunately. Reaper Bones, they make quite a few Fire Giants, and I just don't like the looks of them. I actually tried painting one several months ago, and I threw it out. So instead I'm going with the female Fire Giant, which is by a different sculptor and has a different sculpting style to it, much more preferable to me. Only problem is the casting on this figure was not that great, and also there's quite a bit of detail that didn't transfer well into the PVC Bones material, so there's some soft detail that we have to deal with. But let's get on to the painting, starting off with the flesh. I'm going by memory here. I believe the original Fire Giants had like a coal or ash colored skin, so without researching, that's what I decided to go with. And we are beginning with Vallejo Panzer's Ace's Dark Rubber, which is a dark gray with a little bit of brown in it. Next, we highlight with the Dark Rubber mixed with Panzer Ace's Dark Mud and Vallejo Game Color Heavy Skintone. The Dark Mud is like a lighter version of the Dark Rubber, and the Heavy Skintone, it adds a bit of flesh color to it. Whenever doing really dark skin tones like this, or like Drow Elves, a lot of people see them as just a black onyx skin, but if you add a little brown to that, I just find that much more appealing. So it still stays dark, but still has a bit of warmth, a bit of humanity, for lack of a better word, in the skin tone. Next comes the second highlight, same mixture as before, but with more of the Dark Mud and Heavy Skin Tone mixed in, and just applying it in a slightly smaller area than before. When you're working in dark colors like this, definitely don't want to over highlight them, especially on flesh. If it was something with a sharp edge, we can go up pretty high on an edge highlight, but rounded flesh areas, we're going to keep this pretty dark. And then the third and final highlight, same mixture as before, but this time just with only a bit more of the Game Color Heavy Skin Tone added. And just working on the upper highlights, so top of the area, top of the shoulders, chin, nose, cheekbones, areas like that. That's pretty much it for the skin. Virtually all the other areas of this model are covered, especially with the armor, so that's what we're going to go on to next. For the armor, we are beginning with Vallejo Metal Color Steel. Now, these are airbrush paints, however, a majority of them go just fine using a brush. You do want to make sure that you have a good solid undercoat, preferably black. But it is a bit on the thin side, so if you have, you may need to undercoat first, is what I'm getting at, rather than just going over a blotchy paint job. It may not cover as well depending on what's underneath. To the steel, we now add silver in a very small amount and start highlighting it. A pretty rough highlight right now, just leaving the steel in the recesses. Highlighting metallics, you usually want to go fairly slow and or fairly thin. If I add too much steel, because of the solid material in the metallics, it's going to be really stark and it's going to show up and be real obvious, especially at the end once you put a dull coat on, because once you eliminate that metallic sheen that they have, those differences are really going to stand out. Repeating the highlights, this time with more of the silver added, just working on a smaller area. You can tell the brush is being worked around a bit more carefully now. Now, if you're wondering why I didn't do bronze or copper, that's a very good question, because bronze and copper tend to be more colors associated with red, and we're doing a fire giant here, so you'd figure bronze coppers would work really good with the scheme, and it might. However, what I decided to go for was contrast here. This figure has a lot of jewelry on it, and jewelry is most likely going to want to paint it gold. If I do bronze and then gold on top of that, that's very similar. Also, Fire Giant has to have red hair, and also the cloak is probably going to have to be some form of red as well. So when you're putting bronze and golds and reds and orange reds all together, you're not going to have a whole lot of contrast. You can make it work having similar colors together, but if you want areas to stand out, you need to have contrast. So that's why we're going with the steel look instead. And our final highlight, at least for the moment, is straight steel and just hitting the edges right now of all the different armor pieces. Now we're going for the washes. Using Vallejo inks, we're using black with a little bit of brown mixed in. Black is for shade, brown is for dirt. Don't want this to be a dirty figure, so I'm just adding a very small drop of brown. And we're just going into the cracks between all the armor plates, adding a little bit of a glaze wash in areas where I think it needs a bit more shade, and most importantly, we're applying a wash around all the rivet areas to make them stand out more. And then once the wash is dry, and make sure it's completely dry, we go back with straight silver again and pick out all those little rivets. So now we have a nice dark circle with a silver spot right on top, so all those rivets are have plenty of contrast, and they're really gonna pop. A fire giant is supposed to have flame-like hair. Not hair that is on fire, that would probably hurt a whole bunch. So we are starting off with some Vallejo Model Color Flat Brown. This is basically just a undercoat because I'm going to be working with some pretty light and transparent colors here, so we need to bring it up a little bit. And because just working over black would be a bit too difficult and require too many layers. So flat brown, a little bit of orange in it, a little bit of red. It's a good basis for starting off our next colors upon. Next comes Parasite Brown, Vallejo Game Color Parasite Brown, and applying this over pretty much over the same areas I just did the flat brown. Like I said, the flat brown is just an undercoat. Parasite Brown is closer to what the color I'm going for will be. So we're leaving the flat brown just a few of the deepest areas where I really want some heavy shadow. But this is going to be a good basis to start with. I decided to go with more of an orange color than a red because I wanted to save red for the cloak. Our next color is a mix of the Parasite Brown mixed with Vallejo Model Color Light Orange. The light orange is a somewhat transparent color, so we have to take that into account as we're applying the paint. Now, I'm going to go on a slightly off-topic subject here just because we are painting something of this nature. I'm not really painting this as a redhead in modern description of that term. I'm painting more of a bright orange color here, but if you're ever painting someone with red hair, don't paint it red. I see that mistake quite a bit, and what I mean by that is when someone says I'm painting a redhead, I've seen them go for their bright red paint. That's not what a redhead is. Redhead's not the same color as a Ferrari or something like that. If you're painting redheads, stick to the brown tones and stick to the orange tones. So like the flat brown I used before, you can use that as a base for a redhead and then work in the Parasite Brown into that, or something similar. But red, no, you don't want to use red. Now we are working with just straight light orange, and I'm doing several coats of this for two reasons. First of all, as I said before, this is a somewhat transparent paint, so it goes on thin. And secondly, that fiery type hair that I mentioned before, trying to capture that. So I'm highlighting this much more than I would if it was just normal hair on a normal figure. So trying to intensify the contrast so it gets a bit more of a flame-like look to it. Next comes light orange mixed with Vallejo Model Color Golden Yellow, and again increasing the contrast, going much lighter in tone than I normally would. Also with hair, you have to remember it somewhat, you want to highlight in the same manner, highlight the upper areas as well, but in addition to that, you also want to highlight the areas of thick hair. You gotta remember with hair, it's little thin strands, so when it's bundled together, the color is going to be more intense than single strands. Kind of hard to do on this figure simply because it's her hair in the back is kind of a mess. Essentially, it's not in one large body, it's kind of going in every direction, but that is the plan normally when you're painting hair. Highlight masses, not just loose strands, because they're on the highest point. On to the cloak, finally. Starting off with an undercoat of Vallejo Model Color Burnt Cadmium Red, and now I am dry brushing a 50-50 mix of that cadmium red mixed with Vallejo Model Color Flat Red. And this is a fairly heavy dry brush here, trying to fill in most of the areas of detail, but of course being a little bit more careful when it comes to the areas that have already been painted. Next comes straight flat red, being a bit more delicate with the dry brushing now, just trying to highlight all these scales. Since it is a scaled cloak, you could also, in theory, go for metallic color here if you want to go full bore on metallics. Like I said, bronze probably would have been a nice choice, but I really needed to add some red into the scheme since it is supposed to be a fire giant. Red is a definitely called for color. Now right here should be the next clip in the series where I add some light orange to the red and proceed to highlight individual scales on the edges and towards the bottom of the cloak. However, that piece is missing because, well, I'm not sure why. This is a brand new camera and there is a learning curve to it, and for some reason my video editor did not like that one clip. So pretend this is a little bit lighter color right now being applied, and it's only being applied to specific scales in certain areas. Yeah, you'll see in the next clip. There has been an unintentional theme of undercoating throughout this whole video, but that's often what you have to do with transparent colors. Right now I'm painting the gold, and you want to, if you really want gold to be intense, you have to undercoat that. And first you want to do some sort of brown. It really doesn't matter what color brown, it's a medium brown. I think I used chocolate brown to begin with. And then for the first coat of gold, which I'm using the Vallejo Model Air Glorious Gold, mixing that with Vallejo Model Color Flat Brown, and also using that as an undercoat. Doing both is a bit of an overkill, but I needed to pick out all the areas. I need to figure out essentially what is gold and what is not, because if you remember way back when we started, I was talking about how poor the but the casting of this figure is, and definition of certain areas from one to another was a bit difficult. With our two undercoats in place, we can now paint the gold. And for that, as I mentioned before, using Vallejo Game Color Air Glorious Gold. In case you're wondering, no, it really doesn't have any better properties than the standard Game Color Gold. I find them pretty much the exact same. And the reason why I'm not using the preferred metallic colors, the metal colors, is because the gold in that range is super thin, and it's just not suited for brush painting, and I'm not even sure it's suited for airbrushing, to be honest, because I haven't tried it. And then to highlight our gold, mixing in some of the Vallejo metal color silver, and just a little bit. Gold is kind of like red. You don't want to over highlight it lest you risk turning it into fake gold or silver or something like that. So just a slight highlight. And then for some heavy contrast, going over all the gold with a wash of Vallejo Game Color inks, a brown and black, just like we did with the armor, except for we're much heavier on the brown this time and much lighter on the black. Going for a fairly thick wash, again for contrast, and because of the somewhat poor casting of the figure, needed some real definition between where the gold starts and stops on this figure. On to painting all the gemstones on the jewelry, and boy, there are a lot of them. We are of course going with red as well as green on some of them, but for the red, first thing to do was to, again, undercoat all the gem areas, this time with black. This is not for color reasons this time, however, this is for definition reasons, because again, I had to pick out all the gems first, and I wanted a nice dark line signifying where the gold stops and gem starts. Once that is dry, we're picking our first color, which is Vallejo Game Color Gory Red. Next, we move on to Vallejo Model Color Flat Red, and highlighting in the lower left-hand corners of the gem, so the opposite of the highlight areas, going for a standard how to paint gem scheme here. As well as going for the lower left corner, also trying to pick out the edges of the gems. A lot of the gems have like a square cut to them, and I'm trying to trace that out. And then we follow that up with a mix of the flat red with Vallejo Model Color Golden Yellow. Again, lower left-hand corner, just a spot of it. Because it's a gem, we want something that sparkles, has bright colors into it. We are over highlighting our red. And then finally breaking out the eyeball brush and just doing a very faint spot of white in the upper right hand corner to give the impression of a sparkle, a light sparkle. I'm not going to gloss coat these gems, but if you do, I suggest not doing the white, because then that contrasts and fights with the gloss coat. So if you're going to gloss, skip the white. There we go, we are all done with our Fire Giant Queen, and this figure, a little bit of a pain in the butt. Again, like I said in the beginning, really not happy with Reaper's style they decided to go with for the Fire Giants. This one is a bit better, but the casting is pretty bad. A lot of areas I had to go back to off camera and do a little dark lining here and there to give a bit more definition between areas. Also somewhat, well, let me talk about the dull coat. I always dull coat my figures just out of habit. This is one time I think I probably should not have done that due to the massive amounts of armor on this figure. And it actually, before I sprayed it with dull coat, it contrasted so well with the flat armor, or excuse me, the flat skin tone. So I probably should not have done that for this one. But also, you always want to wash Reaper bones in rubbing alcohol beforehand, or the dull coat can dry a little bit glossy in areas, and I did notice there is some glossy bits, especially on the back of the cloak. So not much I can do to fix that. I may try hitting it with a different type of acrylic flat varnish a little bit later, but that is about it. So 1 giant down, 3 left to go. Next up will be the Cloud Giant coming up. Don't know when. I got a lot more planned before that will happen, but hope you join me for the Cloud Giant and whatever comes in between. Thanks for watching.